My name is Emily Carson. I'm 39 years old and a commander in the United States Navy JAG Corps. At my sister's wedding, I was seated so far from the head table that I could hear the kitchen staff arguing over shrimp trays. The ceremony was held at a private beachfront resort in Florida. Everything looked like it had been ripped straight from a bridal magazine. From the pale pink floral arch to the monogrammed cocktail napkins, not a detail had been missed. Everyone kept saying how perfect Allison looked. Perfect dress, perfect husband, perfect life. I just smiled and nodded, like I always do. My seat was at a table labeled Family Overflow. The others with me included two second cousins I hadn't seen since high school, and our Uncle Ted, who spent most of dinner trying to show me pictures of his cat dressed like a pirate. No one asked about my work or if I'd flown in from somewhere far. They didn't know I'd landed in Jacksonville just 12 hours earlier. My last stop had been an operational law consult in Guam. Before that, Bahrain. And before that, a legal review in Diego Garcia that nearly turned into an international incident. But to them, I was just Emily, the quiet sister, the one who works for the government. My mother tells people I have a desk job at some agency in D.C. A safe, simple, stable job. She likes those three words. Allison, on the other hand, was the golden child. She always was. Homecoming queen, sorority president, married to a Navy officer. Her life was something our parents could brag about without needing to explain. Mine? They kept it vague. Not out of discretion, but because they never bothered to ask. I'd stopped correcting them years ago. It wasn't worth the energy. Growing up, Allison had a way of making everything about her without ever seeming selfish. She was charming like that. I was the kid who read too much and talked too little. I joined the Navy straight out of law school. At the time, my mom called it a phase. She said I'd settle down and get a real job eventually. That was 16 years ago. All these years, I've worked under a different kind of spotlight. One that has nothing to do with flower arrangements or social media hashtags. Mine came with courtrooms, classified briefings, and decisions that carried real weight. But none of that mattered here. Not at this wedding, not to this family. As I watched Allison glide down the aisle in her designer gown, I felt like an extra in someone else's movie. One of those nameless guests you see in the background, clapping politely, then disappearing. I didn't feel angry. Not really. It was more like standing outside a house I used to live in, looking through the window, realizing no one remembered I had a key. So I smiled. I toasted. I listened to speeches filled with half-truths and glossy anecdotes. I played my role because that's what I'd learned to do. But deep down, I knew something they didn't. I knew the truth about who I really was. And I knew the moment would come when the uniform they all ignored would speak louder than any seating chart ever could. And when it did, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd just need to stand still and let the silence do the talking. The wedding looked like it had been designed by a team of luxury event planners, and maybe it had. White orchids floated in glass bowls on every table. Twinkle lights wrapped every palm tree, casting a golden glow across the sand. The ceremony itself happened right as the sun began to set. Perfect timing, perfect lighting. Even the breeze seemed rehearsed. Allison walked down the aisle like she was on a movie set. Her dress shimmered with each step, delicate and dramatic at the same time. Everyone turned to watch her like she was a celebrity. I stayed seated near the back, pretending not to notice when the usher accidentally skipped my row with the program baskets. The chairs around me were half full. I recognized some distant cousins, one of whom whispered, "Who's that again?" when I stood to adjust my bag. They knew I was Allison's sister. But to them, I was the boring one. The one who skipped holidays and sent polite emails instead of showing up in person. They still didn't know what I did for a living. Most didn't care enough to ask. A few repeated the story my mother tells. Emily works in government. Something with papers and regulations. Something safe and dry. Once, at dinner, Allison actually laughed and said, Emily could probably fill out a form in her sleep. Everyone chuckled like it was charming. I smiled. I always smile. My uniform was packed carefully in my hotel room, still crisp from the dry cleaner. I hadn't decided whether to wear it yet. Allison's invitations had said formal, but I was pretty sure she meant cocktail dresses, not commissioned officer whites. I'd just returned from Guam 3 days earlier. It had been an intense deployment, full of late nights and legal disputes over international naval zones, the kind of work that made your brain hurt and your sense of duty sharpen. But none of that felt real here. Here, everything was covered in pastel tulle and lightly edited for public consumption. I watched as guests gathered by the champagne bar, smiling through conversations about careers, babies, and weekend homes. Someone mentioned Allison's new husband and said, "He's in the Navy too, just like her sister, right?" The reply came fast and sure. Sort of. Emily's not really military. She just works for them. That line sat in my chest like a stone. I heard it twice more before the reception even started. It always came with the same tone, dismissive, casual, completely certain. The music started as the sun dipped lower. Couples took their seats beneath a white canopy draped with chiffon. Allison's side of the family looked radiant. My mother's dress sparkled just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to outshine the bride. From a distance, it looked like a dream. But up close, you could see the cracks. My mom avoided eye contact when I walked past. My aunt introduced me to a neighbor as the sister who's always somewhere overseas. It had always been like this. Growing up, I was the serious one, the girl with quiet questions and library finds. Allison was the one with the magnetic smile and straight-A report cards. She was the daughter you put in picture frames. At holidays, Allison told stories and made everyone laugh. I cleared the dishes and drove home alone. When I graduated from law school and took my oath in uniform, my father said, "That's different." He didn't mean it in a bad way, just a way he didn't understand. Over the years, I stopped sending updates. There was no point. My mother didn't know where Bahrain was, and my sister thought NATO was some kind of insurance thing. Still, I came. I booked the flight, sat through the fittings, and attended the rehearsal dinner. I smiled in photos and nodded politely at every offhanded insult wrapped in silk. From my seat near the server's station, I could see Allison dancing with her new husband. They looked beautiful together. A picture-perfect couple. Both in uniform. At least in theory. No one knew I'd reviewed his service file months earlier during a cross-base compliance check. He had a solid record, neat and clean, nothing unusual. The irony was sharp, but I kept it to myself. Let them have their fantasy. I raised my glass and toasted quietly to Allison's future. Then I took a sip and looked out toward the ocean. If I squinted, I could almost forget where I was. Almost. I've worn the same Navy JAG badge for over 16 years. My official title is Commander Emily Carson, U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. That means I serve as a senior military attorney, one of the few who handles operational law at the command level. Most people don't know what that entails. It's not courtroom drama like you see on TV. It's long hours sorting through international treaties, combat rules, classified documents, and decisions that can shift military strategy or shape foreign policy. I've served in Bahrain, Okinawa, Guam, and Diego Garcia. I've worked with SEAL teams and advised commanders before deployment. I've briefed admirals on the Geneva Conventions with one hand on a whiteboard and the other holding a satellite phone. 2 years ago, I was part of a NATO tribunal reviewing misconduct during a joint operation. The case spanned 5 nations and over 1,000 pages of testimony. I helped draft the closing argument that led to a conviction and a change in the multinational code of conduct. Last fall, I flew to Norfolk to consult on a collision between 2 U.S. ships in disputed waters. That briefing changed the course of an international investigation. My recommendations became the framework for how the Navy now trains its legal officers overseas. And yet, in my mother's world, I file papers for the government. I could have corrected her. I could have explained what a command billet means. I could have shown her the citation I received from Pacific Command, or the stack of legal reviews with my name on them. But I never did. Her version of me made sense to her. It was tidy, safe, uncomplicated. So I let her keep it. The underestimation gave me space to do my work in peace. I didn't owe anyone proof. In the Navy, your rank speaks for you. Your bars and insignia tell the story before you open your mouth. But at home, at weddings like this, no one sees that. They just see Emily, the quiet one who never brings a date and leaves before dessert. What they don't see is the woman who's had classified clearance for over a decade. The one whose office might be in a courtroom one day and aboard an aircraft carrier the next. I've stood beside commanders making calls that could shift entire operations. I've sat across from foreign legal advisors in rooms where every word had to be translated and triple-checked. I've helped deliver justice where there was none. That's not something you brag about at a family dinner. It's something you carry quietly, with weight and with pride. I hadn't planned on wearing my dress whites, but something told me to. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the weight of years I'd spent letting people believe I was smaller than I am. The reception had moved to the patio, overlooking the water. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over polished champagne glasses and rented elegance. I stepped out just in time to hear my name. "Emily, come meet Daniel," Allison called, her voice sugar-coated and sharp underneath. I turned and saw her walking toward me with her new husband, hand in hand. He was in uniform, so was I. Daniel smiled warmly at first. "Lieutenant Daniel Monroe, ma'am," he said, offering his hand. His tone was light, respectful. But it changed quickly. Allison slid between us, laughing as if she needed to control the tone of the moment. "Emily works for the government," she said, leaning in toward him. "I know she's a commander, but it's a desk job, nothing like real Navy life. She wouldn't get all your stories." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Daniel had already looked down. His eyes landed on my shoulders. The gold oak leaves. His smile faltered. His body shifted subtly, like a man realizing he'd been walking on what he thought was carpet, but was actually glass. "Ma'am," he repeated. Slower this time. More deliberate. Allison noticed it too. "What?" she said, glancing between us. "You don't have to be so formal." "She's just my sister." Daniel didn't answer. He was still looking at the insignia. I saw the recognition hit him, fast and hard. Lieutenant to commander. He knew the gap. He knew exactly how wide it was. He also knew his new wife had just insulted a senior officer. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the music from the speakers seemed to fade into background noise. I met his gaze. Calm. Unmoving. He cleared his throat, straightened his back, and dropped his hand. Not out of rudeness. Out of respect. That was the moment it shifted. The first crack in the glossy surface Allison had spent her life perfecting. She stared at me like I had betrayed her by simply standing still. "I don't get it," she said. "Why are you acting so weird?" But it wasn't me who had changed. It was the reality she'd built starting to unravel. The illusion she'd protected with careful words and convenient half-truths. Daniel took a step back. He looked toward the dance floor where his father, Rear Admiral Monroe, stood talking to a group of retired officers. Then, he looked back at me. I could see the questions forming. Questions Allison never prepared him for. And answers that would not fit into the version of me she had sold him. Daniel took one more look at the insignia on my shoulder. Then, without hesitation, he stepped back, snapped to attention, and gave me a sharp salute. The motion was automatic, precise, and unmistakably sincere. It caught the attention of half the patio. Conversations paused. Glasses stopped mid-air. I returned the salute with quiet control. No smile, no words. Just the practiced confidence of someone who's been there before. Allison's mouth dropped open. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice too loud, too shaky. "She's my sister." Daniel didn't respond. He kept his posture straight, eyes forward, face unreadable. Then he broke position, just enough to speak. "She's not just your sister," he said. "She's a commander in the United States Navy. JAG Corps." I saw the recognition ripple through the room like a slow-moving wave. Heads turned. Conversations died. Behind us, a voice carried across the space. "Carson?" it said. "Commander? Emily? Carson?" We turned to see Rear Admiral Ross Monroe stepping forward. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man searching his memory and finding something unexpected. "I thought that name sounded familiar," he said, approaching slowly. "You're the JAG officer who briefed Pacific Command last spring." I nodded. "Yes, sir." "You wrote the Redwater Framework on Multilateral Engagements," he continued. "We're still using that. It's been cited at the Naval War College." My mother, standing just behind a floral archway, dropped her napkin. Allison stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "It's an honor, Commander," Admiral Monroe said. Then he extended his hand. "I've read your work." I shook it. Firm grip. Eye contact. Not because I needed validation, but because I knew what this meant. For once, the room knew it too. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to defend my path. It was all right there, in the silence that followed his words. The caterer near the champagne bar leaned forward to listen. A cousin stopped mid-sentence. My aunt blinked twice like she'd seen a ghost. Allison looked like she'd been punched. "Wait," she said. "You? What? Since when?" I didn't answer her. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been. The applause came slowly and awkwardly, but it didn't matter. I hadn't asked for recognition. I had shown up in uniform. I had stood my ground. And for the first time, they all saw me. Allison was still standing there, waiting for someone to explain what just happened. Her perfect smile was gone. She looked lost at her own wedding. I turned to her calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I do work at a desk." That desk just happened to be aboard an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. Even the waves on the beach seemed to pause. No one moved. Allison blinked. Then, without a word, she turned and walked off the patio. Her gown dragged behind her, picking up sand and silence in its path. No one followed her right away. They were all still staring at me. My mother's face had gone pale, like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. To her, I'd always been the quiet daughter, the one who didn't make trouble, the one she could forget during family stories. Now I was standing under wedding lights in full dress uniform, being saluted by her new son-in-law and praised by a retired admiral. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Or maybe, for the first time, she was seeing exactly who I'd been all along. And that was enough. I didn't wait for anyone to say anything else. I stepped off the patio and walked down the path toward the parking lot. The night air was cool against my skin, steady and grounding. Behind me, I could hear a few voices trying to regroup. Chairs scraping. Glasses clinking. Someone is calling my name. It was Daniel. He caught up halfway down the walkway, still looking shaken. "Commander. I mean, Emily. I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stopped and turned to him. "Don't apologize," I said. "Just understand the difference between appearance and truth." He nodded slowly. "You deserve better than what they gave you." "I didn't come here to be seen," I told him. "I came because I was invited. They just forgot who they invited." He looked like he wanted to say more, but I gave him a small nod and kept walking. The applause had ended. The spotlight was gone, and I felt lighter than I had in years, because I had nothing to prove, no more scripts to follow, no stage to stand on. They wanted a performance. I showed them reality, and they weren't ready for it.